Of all of Quasar's components, I believe that QSelect embodies the beauty and glory of Quasar better than any other. I really mean that. It's feature rich, but it's still incredibly fast. It's able to cover just about any use case you could possibly imagine, and its slot system is genius and allows you to tap into Quasar's QSelect and style it however you desire. It really is a gorgeous, beautifully built component. However, as I'm going to show you right now, it's ridiculously easy to get up and running with. Q-select, we'll come in here and say V model selection, and then we want to have some options as well. So we'll say options is equal to, and I'll make that an empty array for now. We can come in and say const selection is equal to, we'll just make it an empty ref, and let's go ahead and add some options. For example, my dog's Panda, Lily, and Min Min. Save it. Oh, and that should be single quotation. And there we go. We've got a QSelect that allows us to select my dogs. Now, these examples will probably be a little bit better if we have some more width. So let's come up here, and I'm just going to hard code a style here of width. How about 250 pixels? And we might even set that to a minimum width. There we go. So it's a little bit more visible. And let's see what else we can do. Well, we probably want to see what we're working with. So how about I change this to a column and then add a pre-tag under here, which shows our selection. I always like to see the data that I'm dealing with, especially when just playing around. There we go. And another thing we'll do is add a label. Let's set that equal to dogs. And I usually like to use filled for my inputs. There we go, selecting different dogs. Another thing we can do, if I just jump into some styling now, is rounded. And I'll smash out some of these quickly just to give you an idea of what's available. We've also got outlined. You can also use outline with rounded. Another one we have is stand out, which is kind of like filled, but now when I click on it, it stands out a little bit. And you can set that equal to some classes. For example, background-purple. That means it's going to stand out with a purple background. All right, getting rid of that. We can also say borderless. And that means that it removes the borders, and this is particularly useful inside of a table component. And in this case, you might also want to add dense as well, which means you've got a QSelect that doesn't take up much room, really nice inside of a table where you might want to easily be able to update some data by just selecting an option. All right, what else can we do? We can also say square. So if you've got, for example, filled, notice that the edges are a bit rounded. We can come in here and say square, and that's just going to square off the edges. This is probably a little bit more obvious on your own computer. Sometimes it can be hard to see in a video. All right, let's play around with the colors a little bit here. I'll get rid of dense and I'll get rid of square, so we're at a simpler example. We can say color is equal to red, and that's just going to give a red sort of feel to the input. See that? That's kind of nice. And another thing we can do is say background color. So let's set that equal to red-2. Looks pretty good. And then we can say label color and maybe red-9. So if you want to go hardcore with this sort of red feel, then you can go ahead and do that. All right, let's decorate this a little bit with some slots. We'll come in here and we can add some slots like template, and this one will be prepend. And this is basically just saying, I want you to add something inside of the input at the start. And by the way, inside being the keyword here, and I'll tell you why I'm emphasizing that in a moment. So now we can say Q-icon, and let's set the name of that equal to event. And there we go, we get the event icon. Now the reason I emphasized inside is because we've also got before. So you've got prepend, which puts it inside, before puts it outside of the input. So that's really good to know that you've got that flexibility there. Now, of course, if we've got prepend and before, we've also got append, and we've got after. Now, after is really good, especially if you want a plus button for your select. So maybe this is a button, and when you click on it, you can add a new item to the select menu. In that case, you might change this to a Q button. Instead of name, we'll use icon there. Save it, and let's change this to add, and maybe we'll make it flat and dense. There we go. So you can imagine you could click on this, that opens a dialog, and you can add new dogs onto the menu there. So there's a few decoration slots we've got available. I'm going to get rid of that to bring us back to a simpler example. Maybe get rid of some of these colors as well. And let's see what else we can do. We can also make it clearable. This is really handy for a QSelect component because there's a good chance that after you've selected something, the user might want to clear it to basically say, I want no selection at all. So we get this clearable button now, and we can click on that to remove that and set it back to null. We can also say disable. That means that we can't actually click on this at all and even show the menu. And we've also got read only. Very similar. This is only for reading. It's not even going to show the menu. So this might be, for example, showing you what the options are inside of a form, but maybe you don't have the access to actually edit it. You've got read-only access. So it's good to know we've got read-only and disable. We've also got hint. So we can say select a chihuahua. That's how I know how to spell chihuahua. And that adds a little hint at the bottom there. And we can also say option cover. Check this out. Options dash cover. And that means when I click on here, the menu is going to cover the input field. So that might suit the style of your website. Another thing we have here is use chips. So let's have a look at that. There we go. That gives us this really cool chip effect. And now when I click on one of those, it removes it. So it's really nice to get that extra feedback, especially when you're using a multiple select. So now we can select all of them, and then we can easily just deselect the ones that we want to. So use chips is really, really handy. You're often going to want to use chips inside of an input, especially if you're using this for tags. Okay, moving on to transitions. Transition, and let's set this equal to show. And how about flip dash up? So that means when it shows the menu, it's going to use the flip up transition effect. And I'll copy paste that down. So we've got transition hide, and that can be flip down. Save it, and now it gives us this really cool flip effect for hiding and showing. Now I'll show you a couple of others that we have available, and then I'll show you how to find other transitions in the docs. Let's set that equal to scale. I think this one looks pretty good. There we go. And another one we have is jump up. I think jump up looks really, really good inside of like a top menu. So for example, if you had a menu up here where you can change account information, I think jump up and jump down looks nice. Save it, and there you go. I often see this in sites where for some reason they use that different effect, and it's almost like it's pulling it out of nowhere. Yeah, I really like it. So if you want to see the other transitions available to you, jump into the Quasar docs, and at the time of this recording, if you type in transitions inside of that search menu in the top left of the Quasar docs, that's going to show you at the top of the list an option that allows you to look at the other transitions available to you. All right, let's get rid of that and move us back to a simpler example. Oh, check this out. So if I refresh the page, notice that when I open up the dialog, it shows inside of a menu like this. Now, if I go Control-Shift-I and I change to a mobile device, let's have a look at this, and I refresh the page, notice that we get a dialog instead. So to make it easier to select an option, it uses a dialog on mobile, but on a desktop, let's refresh the page again, we get a normal menu, which is kind of cool. But if you don't like that behavior, you can come in here and change the behavior. Let's set that equal to menu, save it, refresh the page, we get a normal menu, and when I change to mobile, refresh the page, once again we get a normal menu. So if you want, you can change the behavior to menu. Another thing you can do though is change it to dialog. And that means we're going to get a dialog on mobile, refresh the page on desktop, and we still get a dialog. Now this is particularly cool for a search input. So one thing you can do, and I'll actually show you how to do this later on in the video, you can make it so that if you click on a button or click on a hotkey like Control K, it'll show this menu so you can then select an option. So you know in the view documentation, you can hold Control and press K and it will automatically open up this menu where you can search through the docs. You can easily build something like that yourself using Quasar's QSelect component. That's how flexible it is. It makes it possible to do that. But as I said, I'll get into that a little bit later on because we have a lot to cover. And I want to do the basics first. All right, as I showed you before, we can say here multiple to make that a multiple selection. And how about we come down here and we say const selection is equal to, or we'll change that to multiple selection, a ref that's an array by default. So now I can come up here and model multiple selection, and let's move multiple to the top. That might look a bit easier to understand. So there we go. Now we can do a multiple selection. And let's get rid of this behavior as well. There we go. And we get some cool things with multiple. If I come down here and say counter, now it's going to tell us how many options we have selected in the bottom right there. And another thing you can do is actually limit how many selections the user can do. Max dash values is equal to 2. Save it. And now see how it says 0 out of 2? And if we try to select more than 2 options, it's not going to work. So sorry, min, but I can't select you. But if we get rid of one of those, now I can select min. So that's kind of cool. We have that flexibility. Another thing we can do is model an object. And this is something that you're probably going to use most of the time. Usually when you're using QSelect, you're going to be modeling an object behind the scenes because you've probably pulled some options from the back end, and then you want the user to be able to select from one of those options on the front end. So I'm going to say Control KB to open up my Explorer. And under Pages, I'll say New File here. And let's call this dog options.js. Control KB to close that out. Export default. And this is going to be an array of objects now. So let's set the label for the first one. And by the way, label behind the scenes is going to be used by Quasar's QSelect. So if it notices that it has an object with a label, it will automatically use that as the label. And we're also going to set value. And it also uses value behind the scenes, and I'll show you how in a moment. So we'll set the label equal to panda and the value equal to panda with a lowercase p. And I'm going to copy paste that down. And let's change this one to Lily, and then min. All right, so there's our dog options, Control P, index page, and let's go ahead and throw them in there. So we'll say dog options to get that imported, and I can just use it straight in here. Options, dog options. Save it, refresh the page, and there we go. Notice that it still just works. And as I mentioned before, Control 2, Control P, dog options. The reason that works is because it's automatically going to look at this label here and use that in order to figure out what the label is. I might even leave this open and just rejig things a little bit. Yep, okay, that's good. Now notice if we change this to multiple selections so we can see what's selected. Notice that behind the scenes, it's modeling the entire object. Now you might not want that. So what we can do is we can say, hey, input component, when I select something, do not emit the whole object. I want you to just emit the value. Okay, don't emit the object, just emit the value. We can easily do that by saying emit dash value. Save it, and now when I select an option here, it's only going to emit the value. However, if I change value to an ID, for example, 1, 2, and 3, and save it, notice that as I select options here, well, now it's coming up as the ID. So that doesn't look very good. What can we do about that? First, I should tell you why that's happening. This happens because emit value says, hey, QSelect, I want you to tell the parent component that the new value is equal to whatever the value is in here. So then multiple select is then set to 1, 2, and 3 as we select those different options. But now, since Quasar is only getting an array of numbers, it doesn't actually know how to display this value. It doesn't have an object with a label in it. So since it doesn't have an object with a label, all it can do is say, well, I'm just going to spit out 1 as the label. So that's why emit value gives us this result instead. But what we can do now is say here, map dash options. Now you need to be careful using emit value and map options. I'll tell you why in a moment. So let's save that. And there we go. Now the label is correct, but behind the scenes, it's modeling the IDs. All right. So most people do this. Most people are going to say emit value, map options. That's the functionality that I need. Because as you can imagine, you're modeling this behind the scenes, and then you just want to send that through in a form. Now here's the problem. Map options is actually a little bit slow. And the reason it's slow is because Quasar now has to go through every single object inside of this array, look at the value, notice that it's equal to 1, pull out the label. look at the value, notice that it's equal to 2, pull out the label. So it's basically going through every single one of these options in order to try and find out what should be displayed here. All right, this can be a little bit difficult to understand. It's one of those things that you might need to just sort of sit down and think about for a while, but it's worth understanding because this can cause some performance issues. And this is why Quasar has built the QSelect component in this way. It's basically by default saying, hey, I'm going to give you the entire object, like so, because that's going to give you the best performance. But if you really want to do it this way, using emit value and map options, you can. I'm going to make that possible for you. So here's what I would recommend doing. I would recommend the default functionality where the entire object is selected like so. And then when you're ready to send your response to the backend, do something like this. Multiple selection dot value dot map. And maybe you could say here, for example, const IDs is equal to, and then you would just grab the value and say value.id. Oh, sorry, it's not val.id. It's, in this case, it would be val.value. Or maybe we should make that option. You get the idea, though. So basically, what I'm doing here is manually getting the IDs out using map when I'm ready. And that means that we get the beautiful performance that Quasar offers us by using the entire object, and we can still pluck out the IDs individually. I know it's a little bit of extra work, but trust me, it's usually going to be worth it for the performance benefits. All right, I'm hoping that all of that made sense. Let's get rid of this. Scrolling up, save it. And I'm going to bring in emit value and map-options again, because there is one more thing that I want to show you. Now, behind the scenes, chances are your data doesn't look exactly like this. In fact, I don't usually use the word label, I usually use the word name. So if I'm using name and instead of value I have ID, chances are you're not going to have value there, you'll have ID because this data is fetched from the backend. Now let's have a look at what happens. All right, so Quasar doesn't know how to deal with this anymore. Luckily, what we can do is say options-value is equal to ID, and that's saying, hey, Quasar, when you emit the value or whenever you do anything with the value, I want you to know that that value is using ID. Same thing is possible for the label. We can Control-C, Control-V that down. Options label is equal to name. And there we go. Oh, I might have to refresh the page. Nope, so maybe that's option singular. There we go. So we get the same functionality, but now I don't have to do anything to manipulate my data to make it work with QSelect. I just say, hey, Quasar, this is how my data works, and it just works. This is really important to know. In fact, if there's one thing that you should remember in this video, it's probably this, because it's going to save you a lot of code. Now, one more thing I'll point out is we can add a colon here, and this can actually be a function. So now I can say, hey, give me the current option, and we'll return a template string here, and then let's say option.name. So maybe you want the value to be equal to a combination of the name and the ID. So you could say name dash, and then we could say option, whoop, that should be singular, option.id. There we go. So as I select these, notice that they come up with the name dash the ID. Same thing for label. This can also be a function. Quasar always goes the extra mile to make sure that it's going to work for your use case. Now, one more thing I'll point out is you can come up here and say disable is equal to true. Maybe for some reason I want to make sure that people can't select Panda, because maybe this is a scheduling app and Panda is a very busy dog. She's got a lot that she has to do with her day. So we come in here, Panda can no longer be selected. Lily and Min Min are a lot lazier, and so they can be selected. Right, there we go. And maybe my backend changes this to busy, or it's using busy instead of disable. So what I could do now is say option-disable is equal to busy. And now it will use busy to figure out whether or not it should be set to disable. Let's come in here and, oh, I need to save this. There we go. We get the same effect, but Quasar gives us the option to say how the option is used. And I just want to point this out one more time. The reason that this is so great, these three props that we have available to us, is that you can just get your options from the back end and send them right on down to the component. So we can just send our options right on down directly from the backend. And by using these options, everything is going to map correctly. I think that's really cool. All right, let's move on to sanitization. So all of Quasar's fields are sanitized by default. What does that mean? If I come in here and say strong, cut that, and now let's see what happens. I might get rid of this busy part here, and let's move back to a simpler example. So how about we say label, 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 and we'll change all of those to value. And that means that I can get rid of all of these. I'll get rid of those as well, emit value and map options. And we also don't need the hint. Cool. So notice if I bring this menu up, we get those strong tags showing up. So this is a good thing because if this is user data, if a user were to give you this data and they inputted it themselves inside of a form, and then you're fetching that data and displaying it, they could add some JavaScript inside of there. So they might have, for example, a script tag, and then they could put some malicious code in there that basically, I don't know, does something malicious, puts an alert on the screen, updates a user's data that they don't want to be updated. There's all sorts of malicious things that a user could do if this isn't sanitized. So that's what this is called. This is sanitizing it so that these strong tags are basically going to be spat out and they're ignored in terms of the HTML interpreting it. All right? So if you don't want that, if you want to be able to add your own strong tags, like in this example, or bold or heading, whatever, changing the color, then you can do this. HTML true. Save it, and there we go. Now those strong tags are actually going to work. So let me be clear about this. If you trust the data source that this is coming from, then it's okay to do this, to set HTML true, if you trust the data source. So what do I mean by that? If the dog name comes from a user, it cannot be trusted. If the user is the one that put in this dog name, it can't be trusted, unless perhaps that user is an admin. So you're making sure that only admins can input this data. Now there is an exception here, and the only exception is being that you're carefully sanitizing the user's input on the back end. So if the user is actually the one that entered this data, and that's why it's being displayed in the list, and then your backend is sanitizing it, then that may be okay for your use case. And when I say sanitize, that might confuse some people. It basically means removing potentially malicious input. So removing things like script tags, but that goes way beyond the scope of this video. So I'm not going to go into it right now. We'll just move forward. If you don't understand this stuff, make sure you never set HTML to true. You want to understand how the security works. Okay, another way we can do this is by saying options-HTML. And that's going to make all of the options use HTML. Options HTML. There we go. So that works now without setting HTML to true. And it means you could, for example, bold a couple of examples. Save that. And there we go. This also works for the display value. So if I get rid of this, let's bring us back to a simpler example. Remove all of that. Save it. Very good. We can actually change the way the value is displayed. Display dash value is equal to, and let's get rid of multiple selection because this is easier to do with a single selection. Selection, paste that in there. And now I can say if there is a selection, then I want you to use a strong tag, strong, and then spit out the selection dot label. Let's create some more space here. Otherwise, just give me an empty string. All right, so basically this is allowing me to change the display value. And if we have a selection there, then the display value, which will show inside of here, is going to be wrapped in a strong tag. Otherwise, we just return an empty string. So let's select something. Oh, and I might have to get rid of use chips for this to work as well. There we go. So notice that it's now wrapped inside of a strong tag. In this case, we can then say display value HTML. And there we go. Now the selection is in bold. So it's good to know these little nuances. Just make sure you understand what's happening with HTML so that you don't get hacked. I laugh, but getting hacked is actually quite serious. Okay, so removing this, removing this. Let's close this window out, and I'm going to show you the next thing. One of the slots we have available is the options slot. And that basically allows us to tap into these options and customize them however we want. This is insanely cool. Check it out. I can come in here and close off QSelect. Then we'll say template here, and we'll say option and yank out the scope. Then we can come in here and say Q-item, because by the way, this is using a Q list internally, meaning we can easily just throw items inside of this list. And if you want to understand what I'm doing here, then go ahead and check out the Q list video. We want a Q item, and I might use emit here, Q-item, and inside of that a Q-item section, and then inside of that a Q item label. Tab, and let's just throw in, I'll just open that up, the scope, and then the option on that scope, and the label. And that's option singular. I think it's just an instinct. As I type option, my finger automatically hits the S. All right, let's try that again. So notice I can't select these anymore. And that's because we've essentially taken control of how this option is displayed ourselves. But if we want to inject that functionality back into the item, we can say v-bind is equal to scope.item props. And this is really cool because now we have total control over each of these options, but it's still using Quasar's default behavior behind the scenes. So essentially what we've done here is we've re-implemented the way QSelect works. And the cool thing about that is now we can start doing whatever we want. So let's come inside of this item and say Q-item-section, and I'm going to have a Q-icon inside of there. And in this section, let's make it an avatar section, which basically means it's going to be on the left side and displayed as an avatar would be displayed. And then we can say the name here is equal to scope, and then the current option that is selected, .name. By the way, Control-2, Control-P, dog options, scope.option here is equal to whatever object we're currently on. And that shouldn't be name, that should be icon. Save it. And there we go. By default, it shows nothing because I'm saying option icon, and we don't have any icons inside of here. So let's just add an icon like book, save it, and there we go. Now Panda gets the book icon. How cool is that? So we can basically have different icons for these different options in the list. Quasar's option scope is really cool. It gives us some insane functionality. Oh, speaking of which, check this out. It is a joke how easy it is to add in a checkbox. So if you want to have checkboxes on the left side here, and then you can toggle them on and off using a checkbox, which I often do because I think that's just a nicer experience, we can do that really easily. We'll come up here and we'll say multiple, because this will work better with a multiple example. All right, so now we can select multiple. And instead of an icon here, I'm going to change this to a Q-checkbox. Let's set the model value equal to true by default, just to see if that's working. There we go. We've got checkboxes showing in there. And then essentially, we just say model value is equal to scope.option, or actually scope.selected, I think it is. And there we go. As we select them, they're selected inside of the checkbox. However, when I click on the checkbox, it doesn't work. And that's easy to do too. We simply come down here and we say at update model value. So we're saying, hey, checkbox, if you want to update, so if somebody clicked on this to update that option, then what are you going to do? Well, we can call scope.toggle option. And then we just send through the scope.option. Save it. And how cool is that? Now we can select options with the checkboxes, or we can just select them in the list. Really, really cool. So I love this. I love that Quasar is basically saying, hey, if you want access to my toggle functionality, here it is. It's on the scope. You have total control now. If you want to have access to whether or not the option is selected, there you go. That's available to you as well. So the possibilities here are endless. This could be a toggle. Let's just change that to a toggle. Bam. Now it works. How cool is that? And maybe this is single select. So you say Q radio there. And by the way, Quasar's API is really consistent. So we don't have to change any of this in a code. We just change the component itself. So if we make it a Q radio and change this to a single selection, save it. I haven't even tested this, so I hope it works. All right, it looks like it mostly works, except the model value. Okay, now that I think about it, this doesn't actually make sense with the radio button. You'd have to do a little bit of rejigging to get that to work. So I won't dig into that right now, but you get the idea. We've got some insane functionality here, and we can basically do whatever we like. I really love scopes. So another thing we've got here is selected dash item. Let's get rid of all of the innards here and do this from scratch. And essentially, we could just spit out for now scope.option.label. So this is going to give us the selected option, and then we're going to yank the label out of the selected option. Let's save that. And now when we select something, it doesn't look different because we've basically just done the exact same thing that Quasar does by default. But checkity check this out. We could turn it into a chip. So basically using Quasar's chip functionality, and then make it removable, dense, because I want it to be a dense chip. Let's see what that looks like so far. All right, there we go. Then we can say, hey, I want the tab index to equal to scope.tabIndex. All right, this is going to make this a little bit more usable. And let's set the color equal to, how about we make it white and then we say text color is secondary. Let's just have a look at what that looks like. There we go, so that's working. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm proxying Quasar's QChip functionality. So when we come in here and say use dash chips, I'm basically recreating that functionality so we have total control over what it looks like. All right, so now I could say at remove. So I'm basically saying, hey, QChip, when the user wants to remove you, when they click on this remove button, what are you going to do? And of course, Quasar makes this easy. We can say, hey, scope, I want you to remove at index and then scope.index. So we're calling the remove functionality. We're saying, I want you to remove an item from the selection list. And we say scope.index because that's going to be the current chip. All right, so I basically should have clarified before. This is when you're dealing with multiple select. Let's see what that looks like. All right, we're getting there. And let's see if removing it works. It does. Of course, we need to display something in there. So how about we open this bad boy up. Wah! And we chuck inside of there the scope. Whoop, what am I doing? Scope, the current option, and then we'll yank out the label because we want to use the label here. And there we go. We've basically proxied this functionality, but now we have total control so we can do cool stuff like this. Q-avatar, and then we'll set the color equal to secondary also. Let's have a look at that. Cool. And then you could put an icon inside of there. So text color is equal to white so that we can see the icon well. And we'll say the icon is equal to, how about pets? How cool is that? Total control over how the selected item is displayed. And this doesn't have to be a Q chip. This can be anything you want. Anything. You just whack it into that slot. You use Quasar's functionality like the remove at index, and then you can basically just do whatever you want here. How unbelievably cool is that? Now, of course, we've also got another slot for no option, which is basically saying, hey, if there is no options inside of this menu, what's going to be displayed? So let's get rid of all of this and change that to some text saying no dogs, and then we'll make that dogs. Dogs. Isn't that funny how our fingers automatically do things that we type all of the time? You can tell that I type docs a lot. So no dogs, and then we'll change the options here to just an empty array. Open that menu, and I've done it again. No option singular. And there you go, no dogs. So to make this look better, you probably go Q-item, Q-item section, and I could probably just whack that inside there. Cool, and class is equal to text-gray. All right, that looks good. So if you don't have any options in that menu, because maybe the user has the option to add their own options and they haven't added any yet, you can just give them a little message and saying, no options available yet, click on the plus button to add one or something like that. And you've got this entire slot so you can make that look however you like. Okay, let's push into some of the really interesting stuff that we get with QSelect. Honestly, we've only scratched the surface. This is where things really get exciting. We have at filter. And this bad boy is amazing and so beautifully thought out. The API of this gives you total flexibility. We can have a filter function here, and let's come down here and start building out that filter function. Function, filter function, and that's going to give us the current value. And by the way, I should add in that you can do this. You can say input dash value. Oh, it's going to squawk at me now. Let's comment that out. And sorry, that's not input value. That is use input. And when you say use input, that means that you can actually type something inside of the QSelect field. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But when you use input with the filter function, it's going to pass the value through there. Another thing you're going to get is update. And this is a function that we call when we're done filtering. And if you need, you've also got abort, which basically means that you can cancel doing a request or something like that. Let's get rid of that though. We're not going to use that in this example. And now we can come in here and say, hey, if we haven't fetched our options yet, I want you to go ahead and fetch them. If we have fetched our options, then don't bother fetching them. We'll do some defensive coding. So we'll say if options.value, and we don't have options, so let's go ahead and create that. Const options is equal to a ref that is empty by default, or we'll just leave it at nothing so that it's set to null. So if options.value is not equal to null, so in other words, if we already have some options, if they've already been fetched, then I want you to call update with nothing, which is basically saying, Quasar, don't do anything, just show me the options. It's all good. And then we'll also want to return there. The reason we want to return there is because we don't want to run the code that is going to follow. All right, so hopefully that makes sense so far. Now, check this out. There's a website called https://JSON placeholder.typecode.com. And this is basically just a free API. So if I say /users now, control click that. Oh, that should be users plural. What have I done wrong here? Oh no, that's working. We get a big list of users, free API that we can easily use to basically check and play around with things like QSelect. So there we go. I'll leave that open because we might refer to that in a second. What I can do now is say const response is equal to await, and that means I'm going to have to make this an async function, and we'll use the fetch API. The fetch API is kind of like using Axios. However, it's native and it's available in most browsers. So a lot of people actually aren't using Axios anymore, and they're just using the fetch API because pretty much all modern browsers are using fetch or have it available. So now we can just copy this and just whack it in there inside of a string. So I want you to go ahead and fetch the users. I might be able to close this out now. Yeah. Now we can say the data is equal to await response.json. And I love that we can await this. We can basically say, hey, when you're done fetching the data, I want you to convert it to JSON. And this is an asynchronous task. And the cool thing about that being asynchronous is it means you can do other stuff in the meantime. All right, so once we've got our data, we can then say call Quasar's update function, which accepts a function. And this is where we then say options.values equal to that data that we just got back. All right, let's run through it. Oh, and my linter got rid of the return statement there. Should work now. Yep. So essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, when you open this menu, when you click on this menu, I want you to check whether or not we have some option values. In other words, have we already fetched the data from the backend? If we have, don't worry, just return. If we don't have the data, then fetch it from this free API we've got. So we're just going to fetch a bunch of users, set that to data, and then we call update, which is basically going to do the action of then changing that options list to that new data. All right, let's see if it works. It does not. Oh, you know what I think it is? Yeah, we want to set this to null by default. I think it actually defaults to undefined. So let's save that and see if it works. And there we go, it's working. So it's fetching all of the users. Now we just need to tell the QSelect how to understand that data. Scrolling up here, like I said, this is really important to know. Now you can say option-label is equal to name, because if we come and look at the data here, the user's got a name, and let's set the value equal to the ID, because I want the value to be something unique. Option value is equal to ID. And there we go, it works. And we get a spinner as well. It automatically does the spinner for us. Now note that once you fetch the data once, you're not going to see that spinner anymore. Even if I refresh the page here, we might not see it. And the reason is JSON placeholder is going to cache this data. And since it's been cached, it fetches really, really quickly and you don't get the chance to see the spinner. But there you go. That's a really cool way that we can fetch data from the backend. And once again, I say this all the time, the code is so simple here. It really isn't that much code to achieve this amazing functionality. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that you're thinking, and most people think this with this component, how do I do filtering? That's what I'm going to show you right now. So let's scroll up here and we'll say use -input. In order to have filtering, we need to be able to actually type in there, which is why I've said use input. Scrolling down, and what I might do is use this code to just fetch the data straight up. So if I come down here, let's create a function, async function fetch data. And I believe I can just cut that and paste it in there. We'll get rid of update. And we could simplify this a bit more by saying option.value is equal to await the JSON data. So now I can get rid of that. And we're just going to call this straight away. By the way, this is good to know. If you want it to just load as soon as your page loads, then you can just say fetch data the moment the page loads. And that means as soon as I refresh the page, it's going to get that data. And there we go. It's showing up in the list. Okay. Now let's have a look at how we can then filter the data. Using the same filter function, by the way. So filter function being passed through here, that's good. And I'll say if the value we get, so the user just typed in a value, and if that's equal to an empty string, let's just return everything. Chances are the user hasn't typed anything in there. They just want to see everything available. So how about this? We'll say const filtered options is equal to a ref, and that'll be an empty array. And then for update here, we'll just simply say filtered options.value is equal to options.value. All right, because remember, due to this code here, since that's being fetched straight away, we know that options is already going to have our data. All right, so let's try that. There we go, that's still working. And if I open up the console here, let me just show you that is actually firing. We'll come in and say console.log our value. And there we go, so that is firing whenever we open up that menu. Otherwise, if we do have some data that was typed in here, we then perform the filter. Let's call update, send it a function, and this is the fun part. Now we say const needle, and needle is basically an old school coding way of saying this is the thing that we're looking for. Val, so the value that was typed in, dot to lower case. Now the reason I'm making it to lowercase is because I don't want it to be case sensitive. So if they're using capitals and lower cases, what we can do is just make everything lowercase, and that means that it's going to work regardless of the case. So I always like to put things into lowercase when I'm doing searching. All right, now we can say filtered options.value, and let's filter our options. All right, we'll go through our options, options.value.filter. Give me the current option, and how do we know if it's one that's going to be included? Well, let's return option.name, so the name of the current option, dot to lowercase. All right, so essentially, we've come in here and we're looking at the current user's name, and we've made it lowercase so that the needle can easily be compared against it because it's also lowercase. Coming back here, and I want to see if that includes the needle, the thing that we're looking for. All right, let's save that and see if I did everything right. CLEM. All right, I've done something wrong. I bet you I'm not using the filtered options. Let's copy that. Here we go. Make sure you're actually using the filtered options, and let's try that again. And there you go, it works. How cool is that? That's how you do filtering. And it's worth pointing out that by default, filtering has got a debouncer of 500 milliseconds. That means it's not going to perform the filter unless the user has not been typing for 500 milliseconds. In this case, I just want to show the results straight away because there aren't many results, So I just wanted to do it as the user types in. But as you can imagine, if you're doing a request here, you would definitely want to have a debouncer. Otherwise, every single time the user presses a key on their keyboard, it's going to send a request to the backend. And you probably don't want to do that every single time they enter a key. That's why we've got a debouncer by default. So now I can come up here and say input dash debounce and set that equal to 0. Now I can just type PAT and it shows up straight away. How unbelievably, remarkably cool is that? And this ties into something else I was talking about before. Let's say behavior, oh, if I could spell it, is equal to dialog. And you can imagine then having that dialog that shows up at the top, where you can then type in the thing that you're searching for. Okay, but let's get rid of that and move on to another example, which is searching on the back end. So typey code actually allows you to search on the back end as well. Check this out. I can say $Q, which is basically saying, hey, I want you to search for, and let's say, how about Irvin, E-R-V-I-N. And there we go. It's going to find the user with a name of Irvin. How awesome is that? And now since typey code gives us this functionality, I can show you how to connect that to Quasar. Check it out. We'll do this from scratch because it is a little bit different. I'll remove all of that, but I want to keep the typey code part just so I have it available and we don't have to type the whole thing in again. And how about we have the post endpoint on a variable? So we'll say const posts endpoint, because this time we're going to be searching for posts, and we set that equal to this endpoint here, but now it's going to be /posts. Yeah, I think that'd be good. All right, don't need that anymore. Now I can say async function, and we can go ahead and write this logic. Filter function, receive the value, receive update, and let's have some fun. So first of all, I want to say, hey, if the value that we currently have, the value that was typed in, if we don't have anything there, if it's set to nothing, then I want you to call update and set options.value equal to an empty array. If the user hasn't typed anything in, there is nothing to search, therefore we set it equal to nothing. And then I'm going to return there. All right, defensive coding. We basically say, don't do anything if that occurs, and then jump into the crux of our code. Let's figure out what the endpoint is. Const endpoint is equal to post endpoint. So we're using the post endpoint, and then we add on to that $Q, because you remember that we want to add here $Q equals, and then the value that the user typed in. All right, let's give that a try. $Q equals, and then we pass through whatever the user typed in. How easy is that? That's all we had to do to basically build up our endpoint. Then the backend will do all the hard work. Now we can say our response will be equal to good old trusty fetch API, and we can just send that endpoint directly through. Now we can say our data is equal to, same stuff I was showing you before, you can just say response.json, and then we've got our response. We can then call update, and then we'll say options.value is equal to the data. Oh, we don't have filtered options anymore. We just have a normal options list. So let's paste that in there. There we go. Let's try refreshing. No more warnings. And let's talk through what's happening here. The user types something into the input. If they didn't type in anything, then let's go ahead and just set the options equal to nothing. There's nothing to show yet. And then we return to basically exit this function. Then we build our endpoint. So we've got our post endpoint here. And using this query string, we can basically say exactly what we're searching for based on what that user typed in. Now, we grab the response, we convert it to JSON, and then we say, hey, Quasar, that's what this update function is. Hey, Quasar QSelect, I want you to know that the data has now changed. And behind the scenes, we then change the data. So let's save it, which I think I already did. Refresh the page and search for something here. EST. And it's working. But now that we're using a different backend, we want to make sure that we're mapping to posts instead of that user's backend we were using before. So I'll scroll up here. Option label is equal to, what have we got in a post? Let's change that to posts. And I might have to get rid of this search string here. There we go. We got a title and a body. So let's just set the label equal to title, and the value can still be ID. All right, EST. Oop, and another thing I want to do is bring back the debouncer because it's currently doing it on every single time I type something. So let's refresh the page and try this. TES. And there we go. It searches for every single post that's got TES in it. And it's also searching the body, by the way. So this might look like it's wrong, but that's because the body is being searched as well. So let's just search for Provident vel ut. Provident vel ut. And there we go. How unbelievably cool is that? I really think this component is just so beautifully thought out. The functionality that we get and the way the API works means that anything is possible. Now, one more thing I want to show you, one more thing that Quasar's also thought of is selecting an option after you've searched. So let's come back in here. I'm just going to copy one of these titles and paste it in there. If I now press enter, nothing is actually selected there, which is kind of annoying because what I would want it to do is basically select the first option that's available. So in other words, we can just paste something in there and then that's automatically selected. So currently what we can do is press down on our keyboard and it's selected, which is why it turns gray, and then press enter, and that means the value gets selected. So what I want to do is make it so that by default, a value is selected. I'll show you what I mean. This is probably a little bit difficult to explain in words. What we can do is say, hey, after you've updated this value, I want you to give me a reference to QSelect. Now, if the value is not equal to nothing, so if we actually have a value there, and ref.options.length, so we're able to jump into the options of our QSelect. By the way, this ref here is a reference to the menu inside of QSelect. So, hey, look at the menu. In fact, let's change it to this. Let's change it to menu ref. So I want you to have a look at the menu and specifically the options and check that we actually have some options available. If we have some options available, I want you to select the first option. So menu ref dot move option selection to the first one, and then we set true there. So move to the first option of everything that was searched and then select it. So let's go ahead and paste that in. Oh, that now says menu ref. I'll just type in something like EST. And there we go. So I'm going to have to move my mouse over to the side to show you this works. EST. And notice that that option at the very top is grayed out. So when I press enter, it is selected. But another thing that we're going to want to do is actually come in and say menu ref dot set option index to -1. And essentially what that's doing is resetting the option index in case something is already selected. So let's save that. And hopefully I've done everything right here. And if I type in EST, there we go. Notice that top option is selected by default. And if I press enter, it is then selected from that menu. Honestly, that might have been too advanced for this video, but at least you know that you can add that little bit of extra functionality to your QSelect. This might make it a bit easier for your users to select an option, especially if they're doing a lot of operations. So if you're doing an internal application and a lot of people are using your app and efficiency is important, knowing little things like this can actually save your users a lot of time. And they'll be very grateful knowing that they can do this with your QSelect component. Okay, moving on to another example. Let's get rid of this functionality. I might get rid of this as well. And I'll scroll up here, and we're going to go to a much simpler example here. I'll remove this and this. Let's add in use-chips, see what that gives us. All right, so now we have no menu options available, and we can actually get rid of options entirely. QSelect allows you to use it without options, and I'll show you why in a moment. What I'm going to show you is adding new values by typing in. So you might have seen this on YouTube, for example, where you can add tags, and you say something like rock, and then you press enter, and then that's automatically added in. And we can do that. Check this out. First of all, I'll say new-value-mode. New value mode means that when we press enter, it's going to add that new value in. And I'm going to say hide drop-down icon, because I don't think the drop-down icon really makes sense in this example. Now I can come in there and say Panda, press enter, and the reason that's not working is because new value mode, not model. All right, Panda, and there we go. Lily, it's just added to the list automatically. How unbelievably cool is that? A lot of people don't actually know QSelect could do this. This is further down in the documentation. So it's really nice to know that we've got the functionality to basically turn it into something else, to turn it into a select menu where the user is in charge of what shows up in that menu. And by the way, by default, new value mode is equal to add. So when I say something like this, Panda, and then I say Panda again, notice that it can show up twice, but you might not want that. You might want it to be unique. So you can say add unique. Now if I say Panda and then Panda again, it only lets me add it in once. And we've even got toggle. Now I can say Panda, and if I type it again, it toggles it off. I reckon that's really cool. Once again, if you're building something in-house and efficiency is important, it's really handy to have this granularity over your components. But it gets even better. New value mode can be a function. So let's get rid of this and say at new value, and then pass it through a function on new value. I'll copy that, come down here, function on new value, and then we'll take in the new value that the user has typed in, and then also a function which is done. This is kind of similar to what I was showing you before with filter. It just lets Quasar know that it's done. Now what I'm going to do is show a loading spinner. So let's say const loading is equal to a reference that is false by default. Grab that, come up here, and we'll say loading is equal to loading. There we go. Now I can come down here and say loading.value, .value is equal to true. So we're adding a new value. And then in order to mimic a backend request, I'll say set timeout. And how about we make that 1 second? Then we call done, and we simply give it the new value. It's as simple as that. We just say done, give it the new value, and then loading.value is equal to false. Let's try it. Lily, we get a spinner, and then it's added in. So if you need to do a backend request here and maybe validate that the value the user has entered is correct, you can do that and then call done when you're done. Or call done with nothing, save it, enter, and then maybe show an error message if the backend request was unsuccessful for whatever reason. Okay, but let's bring that back, done with new value. And this has all of the options that we saw before. So we've got add, which is used by default. We'll say Lily here, and that works. And then if I say Lily again, that also works, but you might want to be able to say add dash unique. Save it. Now I can say Lily, and if I add Lily again, not going to work. Another thing we can do, of course, as I showed before, is toggle. Save it. Now I can say Lily, and I bet you can guess this. If I say Lily again, it toggles Lily off. There we go. And there is so many other bits and pieces that you can discover about this component in the docs. I do highly recommend getting very familiar with the QSelect component. If you understand how QSelect works at a deep level, then you'll be able to go to any component in Quasar's library and understand it pretty quickly, or at least most of the components in Quasar's library. So I do recommend jumping into the docs and thoroughly understanding QSelect. It can kind of work as a foundation to understanding Quasar at a deeper level. Especially stuff like this, understanding how Quasar is going to have an event that then passes through to a function, and then you use the values of that function. For example, this done function here. Yeah, just kind of understanding that entire process is something Quasar does a lot to allow really beautiful flexibility in your applications. So the last thing I'm going to show you is how to do native form submit. Need to make sure I cover this in every video. And I might actually get rid of this entire QSelect and we'll do this pretty much from scratch. So yeah, let's do this. I'll get rid of all of that and quickly smash out some code here. So const genres is equal to an array. We've got rock, we've got funk, and we've got pop. And let's add one more, musical theater. And what I want to do is make it so that you can select a preferred genre, but then you can also select multiple accepted genres. This is a really cool example I saw in the docs. Now we can say const preferred genre is equal to a ref that is null by default, and we'll do the exact same thing for accepted genres. Accepted genres, plural. All right, so now I can come up here and let's say Q-form, and inside of that form we'll have a Q-select, and let's go ahead and start building it out. We'll model preferred genre there, and let's set a style on this equal to width 250 pixels. There we go, that's a start, and we need to actually show those genres. Options is equal to, I called it genres, there we go. And that works. What else? We can make it filled, because I like that style. Let's say class is equal to Q, margin bottom medium, so we have a bit of margining on the bottom, since I want to add another field. And then we'll say the label is equal to preferred, and let's go ahead and give it a name as well. Actually, I'm not going to add the name yet, because I quickly want to show you something at the end. So now we can select options inside of there. All right, that's working. Let's copy paste this down. And this one is going to be accepted genres. Let's change the label to accepted, and it will be a multiple select. There we go. So I can say I prefer musical theater, but I'll also accept these 3 genres. Nice. Now let's come down here and have a Q-button, and it's going to have a label equal to submit, and it also needs to have a type of submit. And the reason it needs a type of submit is because it's inside of a form, and if you want to do a native form submit, then the button inside it needs to have type submit. This is basic HTML 101 stuff. Now, let me make sure I'm on the right URL here. There we go, localhost 8080, and if I try and submit this form, notice that we don't get any data showing up. Even if I select something, yeah, this isn't submitting properly. And the reason it's not submitting properly is because every field, when you're using native submits with Quasar, needs to have a name. So we'll set the name equal to preferred, and it uses this name to let the backend know what the name is for that field. I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. Name is preferred, and this one will have a name equal to accepted. Save it. I'm going to go full screen here, and then let's set that to rock, and accepted will be funk and pop. Submit, and there we go. Notice that it has sent through preferred with rock, but in accepted, we get accepted twice, funk and pop. So there we go. It's working. That's how you use QSelect in a native form. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed making it for you. It took a long time to prepare, but oh my goodness, it was so fun exploring QSelect, and I hope you love and enjoy this component as much as I do. All right, I'll see you in the next video.